Welcome, everyone. We hope you're as excited as we are to have our special guest tonight, Randy Shaw. My name is Kimberly Adams. I'm the Orange County Regional Organizing Director for California YIMBY. I have to say it's really exciting to get together tonight, but I'd like to first say that we hope you and your loved ones are safe in these crazy times. And I want to thank we want to thank the essential workers on the front lines because they keep our world moving and save lives every day. Graciously co-hosting this event is Jose Trinidad Castañeda. He's the founder of YIMBY Voice, a North Orange County California YIMBY team. In 2019, Jose had a successful campaign to eliminate excessive $12,500 park dwelling fees on accessory dwelling units in his hometown of Fullerton, and has since seen a dramatic 600% increase in permit applications for ADUs. Of course, I have to add that Jose is a powerhouse, and we're lucky to have him with us tonight. Jose, did you want to say a few words?
Thank you so much, Kimberly, for inviting me to join you all tonight. I'm really excited to tune in and participate in this really exciting discussion. As a millennial myself, it's very challenging to see when I will be able to enter housing security. And so I really hope that we can all work together and really raise our voices moving forward.
Thank you so much. Okay, so before we get started with the program, a bit of housekeeping. There are no mics or videos for the audience, but if you're joining us on Zoom, questions can be submitted by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. For those of you who are on Facebook Live, you can submit questions, and there will be some audience questions, so you can submit questions and answers using the chat feature. So in addition to a Q&A session with Randy, we're going to be asking the audience 2 questions, and we'll prompt you when we're ready. I'd like to give a shout out to the talented California YIMBY staff who are all here tonight helping out with these logistics. I'm now very excited to introduce you to Melissa Breach, our California YIMBY's Chief Operating Officer and the guiding light for us all. Melissa.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. So welcome everyone to this wonderful event. I have to say this is really, our virtual events that have been going on for the last few weeks have really been a highlight for me at a time when most of us are kind of stuck at home and feeling senses of anxiety and frustration. When we know we need to be working on housing issues, but it's really hard to figure out how to do that housing and that work in person. It has been so gratifying to have these events with hundreds of people on them. And I just want to thank you all for being here and for kind of joining us as we do this work. Excitingly, we have been finding that we have anywhere from 30 to 50% of our attendees at these events are brand new people. So they haven't necessarily been at a California YIMBY event before. And to that extent, I do want to tell you a little bit about our organization. So California YIMBY stands for Yes in My Backyard, which is a counterpoint to the Not in My Backyard movement around housing. We've been around for about 3 years. We work to end the housing crisis and the affordability crisis, and make California an affordable place for each and every one of us to live, work, and if you so choose, raise a family. And to Jose's point, I am, well into my middle years and can tell you that I bought my first home and experienced real housing security for the first time in my mid-40s. And I think when we have these conversations about like generation priced out, what we're really talking about is making sure that the next generation, doesn't have to wait that long into their life before they feel that sense of security and really can kind of seize on all the opportunities that security kind of provides. So California YIMBY's work is to end California's housing crisis, and we do that through several kind of key strategies. One of them is probably the biggest is through our legislative advocacy work. So California YIMBY works to change public policy at the state and local level. both through legislation and regulation, and the implementation, the effective implementation of those laws. We do a tremendous amount of organizing work, and that's the work that is kind of led by our regional organizing directors like Kimberly on the ground. And through that work, we have developed over 30 YIMBY teams across the state. We also work in collaboration with some amazing YIMBY organizations across the state to kind of deliver on the promise of meaningful housing reform. And we also work to kind of educate the public, educate our elected officials, educate community influencers and leaders about the root causes of the housing crisis, the opportunities for meaningful reform, and to try and engage them in an effort, I would say, to stop nibbling around the edges of California's housing crisis and to kind of get to the root of the issues and make a meaningful stride forward in dealing with the shortage and our shortage and our affordability crisis. Trying to think if there's anything else I want to say. I think just that this is a wonderful organization to be involved with. I strongly encourage you to kind of sign up for our newsletters, to get engaged with your local regional organizing director. I'm certain Kim will tell you more about that later. And to let us know what the needs are in your community and how you want to be engaged, because we look forward to working with you. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much. So now for tonight's program. Randy's book, Generation Priced Out, Who Gets to Live in the New Urban America, is a seminal blueprint for YIMBYs everywhere. A prolific author and speaker, we're extremely fortunate to have him with us tonight. Randy Shaw is the executive director of the Tenderloin Housing Clinic, San Francisco's leading provider of housing for homeless single adults. Generation Priced Out is now out in paperback with a new preface. So it's updated for a lot of what's been going on both legislatively and socially. The book highlights the pricing out of a new generation of working and middle-class residents from the nation's progressive cities. He offers proven strategies from over a dozen cities for addressing the affordability crisis and combating climate change. Shaw's prior books include The Activist Handbook, Beyond the Fields, Cesar Chavez, the UFW and the Struggle for Justice in the 21st Century, and The Tenderloin, Sex, Crime, and Resistance in the Heart of San Francisco. Randy also edits beyondcron.org. I was intrigued by this blurb for The Activist Handbook by legendary scholar Howard Zinn. Anybody researching or writing anything about contemporary US political life should be familiar with The Activist Handbook. Anybody attempting to influence local, state, or national political decisions needs it desperately. Politicians may read it and tremble a bit. So it's clear that we have the right guy on our side tonight. And now I'm going to give a huge welcome to Randy Shaw.
Start the video.
Randy?
Well, great. Thank you so much. And I want to tell everyone, Kimberly has done a phenomenal job putting this together. And I'm saying we need to organize statewide political actions as well as we did this event. So thank you, Kimberly, and thank California YIMBY for having me. Much appreciated.
Randy, we're gonna, at this point, did you want to start with the overview of your book?
Sure. You know, the interesting thing is that I ended up writing the book right after the Oakland fire, which killed all those people, the warehouse fire, the Ghost Ship fire. And I began thinking, wait a minute, Oakland's a progressive city, San Francisco's a progressive city, Berkeley's a progressive city, yet you have working young people who can't even afford to live in these cities because of the land use policies by the quote progressives who run those cities. And I originally was going to write a book that just talked about the Bay Area. And then I went to realized Seattle, Los Angeles, Denver, New York City, Portland, it was really the same story. And so I wrote Generation Priced Out to really describe how progressive cities that vote right for the progressive presidential candidates and for the local people, but what they do with progressive is maintain exclusionary zoning and rigid restrictions on housing development, which has caused the rising unaffordability. So that's what the book really does. It doesn't do the normal thing, which says all the problems are caused by evil developers, and if we just stop new housing, all is well. It says actually not building enough housing is a major source of gentrification, that the luxury housing people criticize is actually the single family homes in the neighborhoods that don't allow any apartments. So it's a very different take than we normally get about books about urban America. And I think it's worth reading for that reason alone. The opportunity to do a new preface was really to look in the paperback, was to really look at what happened since in the year, what happened in 2019. And one thing, people watching this show right now, many people I come across, they feel like, gee, we're not doing very well. SB 50 didn't pass, and now we don't have state money for housing money, and things aren't going well. And they kind of forget that forever, until 5 years ago, when there was a land use hearing in any city in America, the only people who really showed up were opponents of the housing. We forget that was true 5-10 years ago, everywhere. And how the YIMBY movement has changed the entire dialogue, changed the whole framing of what the housing crisis is, which is really a outrageously undersupply of units. And I think that's what we're moving forward on, and people should not be discouraged that we haven't achieved everything in 3 years. I wrote a book on the farm workers, as you mentioned. Cesar Chavez began organizing the farm workers in 1962, 13 years later, 13 years before they even got the Agricultural Labor Relations Act. We know the civil rights movement went on for 100 years, but somehow I know people want things to happen quickly, but we've made remarkable progress. We just had the big thing with the big court ruling on SB 35 yesterday, which sort of opened the door for a lot of things to get SB 35, which was a fight that the YIMBYs waged. The YIMBYs won that fight. And look how that benefited affordable housing in California. So I look at, all across America, we have some of the same problems we see in California. And I write, the book in Massachusetts, which used to have a lot of housing. It takes a super majority to have a zoning change for housing. A super majority. Now, why would it take a super majority when we're supposed to be a democratic society, majority rules? And I talk in the preface how there's a housing choice bill in the state legislature that just would say majority rules, and how progressives helped defeat it last year. And it's coming back, and hopefully it'll pass. A bill that just says majority rule. So if you've done the organizing and the majority of the Newton City Council wants it, it should be able to pass. But not in Massachusetts. In Denver, 20% of property owners can trigger a supermajority council vote. Now, isn't that a strange way to do democracy? 20% triggers a 75% approval process for housing. So there are so many ways in which housing is obstructed, and we need a movement like the YIMBY movement to fight back against this. And that's really what my book, it talks about, in city after city, and I have some great stories. No one had heard of Maya Rosas from San Diego. She just went there, she moved up from Santa Monica. Now she's like a celebrity in the YIMBY movement. She was like the only person on the San Diego meeting, the commissions, that said, I think we ought to build more housing and have more mixed use. It was like, what are you talking about, mixed use? Now look at the politics of San Diego and the YIMBY Democrats and what they've done. Jesse Kenzen Benanov in Cambridge goes to a meeting and says, "But I don't get this. Why aren't we supporting the housing?" And some people in the audience said, "Who's this guy? We don't know who this guy is." And they go up and talk to him, and he's trying to explain why we should support housing in Cambridge. He forms an organization called A Better Cambridge. Well, A Better Cambridge has become a major political force, and I was able to talk in the preface about how they won the last election, and they're going to pass a citywide 100% affordable housing zoning overlay, which the progressives in Cambridge opposed. The progressive in Cambridge who supported Bernie Sanders opposed a 100% affordable housing overlay. So it only took one person in Cambridge and one person in San Diego to turn that around. So if you're listening right now and you don't see an organization in your city, start it. Start talking. Do what Sonia Trouse did in San Francisco. People might think, wait, who is this weird person? But there's going to be others who are going to say, hey, I want to join with them. And that's how things get built. So that's what I'm really trying to do in the book, is explain, is have people reading it and get encouraged by saying, here's what they've done in Portland. And we know the Portland activists have been remarkably successful. You know, and with people like Madeline Kovacs and Portland, now it's called Portland Neighbors Everywhere, or Portland Neighbors Welcome. And they're about to pass a really successful zoning reform. The state of Oregon already passed it, allowing fourplexes. We see this in Austin with affordability unlocked. There's just so much going on. And of course, Minneapolis, which I write about in the book. And I want to just tell one little story, if I can, about what I talk about in the book of Minneapolis. There's a guy named John Edwards who does videos of these land use hearings. And every city should have a John Edwards. He takes videos and he edits them and he shows people who couldn't be at the hearing what's really going on in these hearings. And I describe it in the book, how there's a hearing and people are breaking down and crying about this project. They don't think it's safe for their children. They want to know who's going to do the 311 calls. What are they going to do with the discarded mattresses? And you're thinking, wait, they must be trying to open a halfway house in a homeowner neighborhood. No, it was a 10-unit building in an 80% rental area. So that's how things get so out of touch. We've allowed people who are self-interested economically, most homeowners, in stopping housing. We've allowed them for too long to frame the debate. And what is changing, and what Generation Priced Out is all about, is we're changing the debate and we have to change the policies. So that's kind of the big picture of what it's all about.
Right. So let's hit a little bit on NIMBYism. So you hit on a little bit there, but the YIMBY movement arose to combat the NIMBYism. So do you want to just hit a little on millennials versus boomers?
Well, I think, people often say to me, Randy, I agree with everything you're saying, but we shouldn't make it so much a generational dispute. But actually, if you go to a Berkeley City Council or San Francisco meeting or any of these meetings, almost all of the opponents of the housing are boomers, and you rarely see a millennial against housing. It's really extreme in Berkeley, where they had a hearing in 2019 where every single person who spoke against the project was a boomer. And all the people who spoke for it, there was boomers and young people. And I think it's quite clear, if you buy your house, like when I bought my house in 1989, it's embarrassing how little we paid in retrospect. So you have people who paid very little for their houses and the market went crazy. And we have young people who can't even afford a small little house because the average house price in San Francisco is now $1.7 million. A small little house in Berkeley is $1.2 million. So millennials who also come out with college debt, when I went to UC Berkeley, my parents paid $212.50 a quarter. That was $650 a year tuition. Now it's $15,000. So we've saddled millennials with debt, high housing costs, and then we're telling them, you know what? We're not going to build much housing. We're going to create artificial scarcity. We have our homes. We're profiting from the scarcity. You're out of luck. Move to Sacramento, where 140,000 people commute from Sacramento to the Bay Area, prior to the pandemic, which is not a very good thing, by car. So you have boomers who think of themselves as progressive, they think anti-development is progressive. They think of themselves as environmentalists, even though they're requiring 140,000 people to drive to the Bay Area every day from Sacramento. And that's what we see this all over. We see this in the book. I talk about Venice, California, and situations, the opposition of Venice, the long-haired people, the guys who make surfboards, saying they don't think it's safe to have their kids around housing for homeless. We see it in the liberal parts of Los Angeles. And we see it in Cambridge. We see it I have a whole section on New York City, the West Side, known as a very progressive village, Greenwich Village, opposing senior housing. So we see that all over. And I think before me, other authors didn't really want to call their allies on this. So that it all became evil developers are the cause of all these problems, instead of homeowners who lead the NIMBY movement.
So what about what you cover in your book is 10 steps to preserve economic and racial diversity. Can we talk about that?
Yeah,
The 10 steps?
and I think one of the steps, obviously we have to build more housing, but one of the steps that I see talked about a lot is how cities use public land. We had a thing in Seattle, they had this public land in a gentrified area, and instead of, it's the South Lake Tahoe, South Lake Union area, instead of putting affordable housing in a place that will never otherwise get built, the mayor said, we want to maximize the revenue. We don't want low-income people living in a real affluent area. Of course not. We can sell the money and get all this money and move them to the low-income areas where they belong. And we see this all the time. And I talk in San Francisco, I mean, we've had public land at the Balboa parking lot since the 1980s. There's finally a deal, but that's literally 30 years later because City College faculty wanted to park there. And you know, I've talked, there's places in LA, everyone says there's nowhere to build in LA, but they have all this public land just sitting in parking lots and things. So I think one of the main things I talk about is cities have to be more strategic. We also have to expedite land use approvals. And that doesn't cost any money. It doesn't upzone anything, but expediting land use approvals reduces the cost of housing, and people should not have to wait like they do in San Francisco 4 to 5 years from when they apply for a project to when it's finished. So, you know, I have a whole list of them, but the three that I really highlight in the preface, the three really key ones: building YIMBY organizations in every city, and electing progressive, pro-housing officials. And if we only remember one thing that I said tonight, it's how important electing pro-housing officials are. We saw that with Scott Wiener in Sacramento. I look at the LA City Council, we don't really have one champion, which is one of the problems. And I look at what one person, Minneapolis, Lisa Bender, and what she did. If she had not been on the city council, they would not have rezoned Minneapolis. If Gregorio Cesar is not on the Austin City Council, they don't have affordability unlocked in Austin. If Tina Kotek is not running the legislature in Oregon, we don't have the statewide rent protections or the fourplexes. It's really important that you elect the right people, because that's what really determines what our future is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a quick question from Angela Griffin. What is the supermajority?
Well, it can't just be a 5-4 vote in a 9-member council. It has to be, you have to have like 8 votes or 7 votes, 7-2 or 6-3 is required instead of 5-4. And that's a big difference, 6-3 versus 5-4. And the reason that Cambridge could not pass its 100% zoning overlay, they had a majority. They had a majority, but you need a 60 or 70% majority. And why are we picking housing as the one area? Every other decision the council makes is just majority vote. It's to stop housing from being built. All these impediments and our barriers are created.
Okay, so I have another one. This is from David Elliott Lewis. Please address the challenge of allowing more housing through zoning reform versus protection against displacement of low-income populations.
Well, I know David well, and he lives in our Tenderloin neighborhood. And as I say in the book, you know, I haven't gotten this, but obviously I've spent my whole life working on rent control and tenant protections, and you have to have them, but they're not enough. And what you have to do in a place, in all the cities that have rent control, tenants are protected. But if you don't have a place, you can't, new tenants, new working class tenants, new middle class tenants can't afford to move to all these neighborhoods because nothing ever gets built that's affordable to them. So you have to have tenant protections and build housing. That's essential. And we have 40 states in this country, including Illinois, Massachusetts, Colorado, and Washington, which have major cities that have terrible tenant problems that don't allow cities to enact their local laws to protect tenants. And that's a big problem, and groups need to change that.
Okay, and I have this one from, and I hope I'm not butchering the name, but I think it's Andre. Would eliminating or modifying Prop 13 help alleviate the problem, i.e. older people don't move and therefore reduce housing stock for younger people?
Well, we're never going to change Prop 13 as it relates to the housing part. And there's a ballot measure that's going to make $10 billion bring into the state that would create the long hoped for split roll for commercial. But let me mention one thing about the homeowners, and I think which gives an opportunity to our future, is we know that seniors feel trapped in large homes and don't want to have to leave their neighborhood. If we allowed fourplexes in every neighborhood in California, seniors in those neighborhoods, like even Westwood, could move to a small unit, sell their big house, and still stay near their friends. I think we could do a better job of tapping support for seniors. I know the organizations support SB 50 and the like, AARP and the like, but we need to do more outreach to the seniors themselves in these neighborhoods, these homeowner neighborhoods, and explain why they benefit. Just while we're on that subject, one thing we've learned from the COVID, can I get into that now? Because
yes, please do. We were going to get to that, and this is as good a time as any.
Because
yes.
One thing that really struck me about the COVID, probably anyone who follows, and I want to make sure I pronounce his name right, so I wrote it down, Dr. Josh Albrechtsen, who's in California EMB, runs the Grow LA site. Everyone's reading his posts because they're so informed about the medical stuff, but we need to use doctors more and nurses more on all of our housing campaigns, because people are realizing the connection. The number one cause and correlation with the COVID is overcrowding in your rental unit. It's not density, that's completely false because Hong Kong has no cases. It's the density of your apartment. And because we haven't built enough housing, we have overcrowded units everywhere in urban America. And I think we could do a better job, the YIMBY movement, of connecting to doctors and have them as spokespeople, as they are now around a lot of the homeless issues in COVID-19. I did a study in 1999 with Megan Sandell and Josh Starfstein. Megan Sandell still working for the homeless in Boston, called "There's No Place Like Home: How America's Health Crisis Affects Its Kids," and it's how its housing crisis affects its kids, and it still is. And so we should work more with the medical people and the nurses who've been very effective in getting assistance for the homeless population. I haven't seen that as much as we need to. We also need to make another effort to reach out to the environmentalists. And I know there in Portland and Seattle, the Sierra Club is such an effective ally of housing people. And then we have a different situation in the Bay Area and in Los Angeles. And I know that efforts have been made in the past and they haven't really been successful to build those alliances. But for those listening in LA, with all those blue skies, I think more people are going to want to go back and figure out a way to stop that traffic than we had before the COVID. I think there's really an opportunity here to build stronger alliances with environmentalists. So I look at environmentalists, seniors, and doctors and medicals, nurses, and trying to strengthen those alliances for all of our housing campaigns.
Okay, and I've got plenty of questions coming in. One of them said, do you think that the coronavirus recession will lead to laws like SB 50 being passed in California in order to increase the tax base to help reduce the state's budget deficit? That's from Nish. And I thought about something like that, like, wouldn't it benefit cities to allow more development to get some economic stimulus?
You know, Kim, I have to say to you, you would think that I submitted that question, because what I want to make a big topic of tonight is we've had a great booming economy, and we haven't wanted to talk about how housing is the #1 generator of jobs and economic development, because the criticism of the YIMBY movement is, oh, the economy is overcharged, rents are going up, and it's all because of an overcharged economy. So we haven't wanted to talk about the economic role of housing. Now that we're in a different position, we haven't, the #1 argument is now, if you want to revive our sagging economy, deal with the deficits we have at the city and state level, build housing. It creates jobs. It used to be said, I tried to verify it today, but I'm sure it's still true, every unit of housing creates 7 jobs. because you have the construction jobs, but you also have the furniture they need to buy, the services they have associated with even if it's getting cable television in the new place. So it creates a lot of jobs, and we have not, as a movement, wanted to talk about that much because the YIMBY movement kind of came around with the tech boom, and it was like, well, no, we don't want to act like we're for economic boom, but we need that development. So when I say that I think that the COVID-19 has expanded our possibilities, it's precisely that. I don't think we're going to get SB 50. I think upzonings, I think there's a little skittishness right now among the legislatures over that, but we can certainly expedite the approval process. And there's other things we can do, but we have to move on that, and we have to make the economic argument because it is so strong in this environment. Particularly, a lot of those hotel workers who are going to be out of a job maybe 1 or 2 years, they can do other work in the housing industry.
Okay, so I have one from Will Moore, who's a San Diego endorsed candidate for City Council District 1, which includes La Jolla. He'd like to know, how can statewide and national YIMBY activists best engage with local YIMBY leaders throughout the country?
Well, I think it's really done by using them as a model. I mean, San Diego's done a very good job. You know, the YIMBY Democrats of San Diego are doing a phenomenal job, and they're making great political alliances. I think it's looking, what I always say, what I try to do in Generation Priced Out is say, look, here's what they did in Seattle. This density bonus plan is really smart. You should do it in your city. What Cambridge is doing when they eventually pass that 100% zoning overlay, why doesn't every city pass that? Why doesn't every city say that if you do 100% affordable housing, you can build multi-unit buildings? We can avoid the fight about, well, we're going to gentrify. No, it's 100% affordable. And a lot of people don't realize that when you ban fourplexes, you're also banning low-income apartments and affordable apartments, 100%. So I think to look to other cities for lessons, you know, in the big picture, and I make this very clear in Generation Priced Out, for low-income people, federal money is essential, and we've never gotten it. We've gone 40 years without the federal government making up for the budgets we used to have routinely until the late 1970s, until Ronald Reagan in 1981. And we've never made it up. And the next president has to do that. And what has been so great is the campaign, Our Votes, Our Future, the campaign that National Low Income Housing Coalition launched. We've had more Democrats running for office talking about housing this year than we've ever had. And we need to keep it on the front plate. So when if the Democrat takes office in January, housing is not behind 10 other issue categories as it often has been in the past, because we did not get any special money under Clinton or Obama. That has to change. So we can serve that population as well as we serve the people who aren't eligible for that subsidized housing.
So we've got, we're going to break real quick. We've got plenty more time for Q&A. We're going to go back to it. But what we want to do is ask the audience a question. Jose, do you want to take over?
Yes. So using the Q&A button, please describe one thing about housing that you did not know until hearing Randy speak tonight. We just have a few moments for responses, so please type your answers below.
Thank you, Jose. Okay, and now I'm going to wait for, Randy, you know what? Let me give you another question while we're waiting for some responses on that. I've got, do you have any ideas how to limit the effect of higher construction costs?
Well, I think, you know, you really have to do more modular. I mean, I try to do this thing with a developer in San Francisco, and it got opposed because it was the module was made in China. But I think you have to do more modular, and you have to speed up the approval process. I talk about it in the book a lot, how long it takes to do stuff. And what we have now is people who don't think get the shovel in the ground. We don't even know if entitled projects, if they can get financing because of the financial crisis. So It's just not fair. In Seattle, and I describe in the book, I compare Seattle and San Francisco, and Seattle's process is more than twice as fast. So developers are eating that money. And one thing that people may not realize, and I describe in the book, is the developer is often putting up their personal bond on the money. They're paying interest on the vacant land, but it's not like they can just declare bankruptcy and someone like Donald Trump does and just walk away. Their home is usually used and their own personal assets. So delay costs them a lot of money. And why do we do it? Why do we have these crazy processes? It's solely designed by NIMBYs. The community input process, the multiple opportunities to appeal things, none of it makes any sense. We don't do that with other parts. We don't say, we're going to let I'm going to decide what kind of health care my neighbor gets. But we say, if my neighbor is trying to do something, I'm going to stop it. You know, I talk in the book how Annie Fryman got started over a duplex that she was involved in Noe Valley. Annie Fryman is Scott Wiener's aide, big housing activist. And the neighbors are still fighting this duplex. We're fighting this duplex for years. Duplex. So, you know, we could expedite and reduce costs a lot by just saying, hey, if you meet zoning, it's approved. It's approved. Simple as that. There's no hearings. Seattle does not have a political appointees, a planning commission that can vote down projects. Seattle's planning commission actually does planning, which is rare. Most of these, so I think we are a prisoner of our own we've created the obstacles, and then we complain about being in prison and the cost is so high. We could lower costs, but we do have a constituency that wants costs to be high so less gets built. And it all goes under the guise of neighborhood input.
Yeah, and CEQA lawsuits. That's another good one.
Well, you know, that's hard because unfortunately, California labor, especially in the Central Valley, has decided that CEQA lawsuits are the best leverage they have to get union jobs on those projects. And so what I'm always told is trying to change CEQA, you know, Governor Brown wanted to change CEQA, Governor Newsom wanted to change CEQA, and it really isn't happening. But that being said, there's ways you could, like, for example, there's often delays in boom times for planning departments to process. It's like in San Francisco, there was a 6-month delay. You file your application, no one even looks at it for 6 months. LA was allowing people to pay private companies to do the EIRs. Well, that would save 6 months right there, if not a year in boom time. So there's a lot of ways we could do it if we are committed. But too many of our mayors across the country and city councils are so beholden to anti-housing homeowners for their election that they just don't want to do it. And LA is a perfect example.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple of responses to what we didn't know about housing before tonight. And one of them is, hold on, Marissa Tucker said, I had never heard someone recommend getting medical allies as a way to have people understand density equals, is that overcrowding, and that housing is healthcare. I guess never hearing someone use that analogy. Am I reading that right?
Read that again.
I'm going to go on to another one. I didn't realize that building new housing creates multiple other jobs outside of just the construction. And that's from Nish Krishnamurthy.
Well, it's interesting because we haven't promoted that, I think, as a movement, because we've been very sort of, I don't want to say defensive, but careful about not promoting the economy's overheated. Now we're saying we're creating more jobs, and people say, more jobs, that's, you know, we already have, you know, too many people living here. But now we need to do that. And the economists among who are listening and friends of economists, reports need to start coming out about all the jobs housing creates. Because one thing, state legislators are going to be under a lot of pressure, and our local city councils everywhere, to generate revenue. We've lost so much hotel tax money, and it's not coming back for at least a year. And we are not going to have the sales tax revenue, and we're talking desperate times. That gives us an opportunity to say, now what's your excuse for not building housing? You want to keep us in a depression? So I think we need to move on that right away. People should start talking about that tomorrow.
Yeah, so I got clarification on the answer from Marissa Tucker. And she said, I never heard someone recommended getting medical allies as a way to have people understand density does not equal crowding and that housing is healthcare.
Well, you know, it's interesting because we used, again, for reasons, for whatever reason, we always associate, there's a lot of medical testimony about the unhoused and how they're vulnerable on the street. But now we're finding that the reason you have such high incidence of the COVID in the Bronx and places, because they're living several to a unit. And the overcrowding is like, if you say what issue never gets talked about in the national level, forget the homeless situation is bad enough, but we have the ill-housed. 75% of eligible households in this country for federal assistance don't get it. And when families don't get it, it means that instead of a family of 4 or 5 living in a 2-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom, they're living in a 1-bedroom, or they're living in a studio because it's all they can afford. Or in LA, they're living in a converted garage, which I talk about in the book. A lot of converted garages in LA, which are rented to families. So then you wonder, well, wait, and often you have people, you have to live with roommates, people listening, they have to have 4, 5, 6, 7 people in a house. And they used to have a common space, but now that's become a bedroom in most houses. So there's no more common space. And then we wonder why there's a high incidence of the COVID in those dense houses. So we need the medical testimony for overcrowding, and maybe some of the doctors who listening or who know doctors can start connecting to those people, because I think we need this evidence. This makes it sounds different when a nurse gets up there and says, we need this development because people are overcrowded. It makes a big difference in terms of the whole perception.
And here's a good one. How can we ensure that housing for low-income people is located in better neighborhoods?
Well, that's a big issue of mine. And I talk in the book about this huge fight to keep senior housing out of upscale and elite. It was a fight that we won. It's an amazing story in the book, but it's very rare. And I think we need to fight for that. And that's what bothered me about that South Lake Union thing in Seattle, is we had the site. That's why we have to push for the public sites in upscale neighborhoods to be affordable housing. See, I think what's happened is city governments figure like, hey, we don't want to have a fight over building it in this neighborhood. Let's just put everything in a Tenderloin. So they'll say, God, the Tenderloin has so much affordable housing. Yeah, it's because other neighborhoods don't want it. That's the reality. And I think in LA, we see the similar kind of thing. And again, we need affordable housing in protected communities, but we also need people. The only chance the middle class is going to have, or the working class to live in Westwood, is if we allow market rate housing there. That's the only chance. And I think that's often forgotten by people who are affordable housing advocates, that affordable housing does exist in market rate units. In fact, there's more affordable housing through inclusionary. It's not the world, but we're not going to get market rate housing, affordable housing in San Francisco's Marina District, in San Francisco's North Beach, in Pacific Heights, but you can get affordable units in those market rate projects. So we need to be more conscious of that and not just allowing the low hanging fruit. Okay, we're just glad to get it built anywhere. I talk in the book how one of the trends that's come up, it happened in Austin, it was talked about, but it happens in other cities. We talk about housing on transit corridors and increasing density. Well, they want to put all the affordable housing on transit corridors, the high density, on heavy traffic streets. But that's not always the best place for families to be on heavy traffic streets. So let's not limit family housing to and density to high traffic streets.
Okay, and this one comes from Theodore Randolph. After so many decades of federal failure, is it reasonable to wait for federal help? Why don't we have shanty towns in California? Instead, we have tent cities. Is that really better?
Well, I would answer that question differently. We can't wait for the federal help, and we haven't. I mean, every city that I write about almost has done a local bond. San Francisco is constantly, and LA had its $1 billion homeless, had a multiple measures. San Jose just passed a measure. Michael Lane led an effort in San Jose, did a great job just in time, just before the COVID came, to get that passed, and a real estate transfer tax. If your city does not have a real estate transfer tax that's earmarked for housing, do that for November. A supervisor in San Francisco just decided is going to put a measure that's going to raise $100 to $150 million a year by just raising the real estate transfer tax on sales of over $10 million and over $25 million. So those are not low income, those are not the affordable homes. And I think it's going to pass at the ballot. We need to look at local sources of funding aggressively. I think one fact that people listening here may not realize, and I want to just bring it up, it's like a big thing for me. We were all excited that Jerry Brown had this rainy day fund, but realize what happened because Jerry Brown never spent the $20 billion he was keeping in his rainy day fund for affordable housing. We were in affordable housing tsunami in California, and Jerry Brown didn't spend a dime. Newsom in his first year spent a little, but the plan was, oh, this year in 2020, we're going to really spend a lot more. Well, the money's gone. So the rainy day, the tsunami has happened, and housing didn't get the money. So you have to be aggressive in seizing money. So if you're in a city that doesn't have a real estate transfer tax on luxury homes and luxury properties that is earmarked for housing, talk to your representative tomorrow.
Okay. And then I had a couple of other questions. One of them is, how have the politics of housing changed since I wanted to ask this one. Since you first wrote the book, what positive changes have you seen as a result of YIMBY efforts? What would be the largest victory, and by whom?
Well, largest victory is probably Oregon. Oregon began 2019 with a statewide ban on rent control and just cause eviction, and no land use exclusionary zoning was fine. And thanks really to the leadership of Tina Kotek, who unfortunately I did use the preface to praise her. They did a statewide rent stabilization and just cause, and which affects Portland a lot. And they mandated fourplexes statewide in all major cities, including Portland. So that's incredible. And Minneapolis gets a lot of credit, but Oregon has actually done more. I also think that overall, every time there's an article about housing, the YIMBY voice is heard, and it was not heard before. San Diego is really amazing, and I know it's more than Maya Rosas and her, but her leadership is really key. What the YIMBY Democrats have done there, now they're going to elect a mayor, I believe, who's very pro-YIMBY. I mean, my family used to live in San Diego, and we had certain stereotypes about what a conservative city it is. We're going to be looking at San Diego as a model. LA is going to be looking at San Diego as a model, saying, how are they doing it? How are they doing it and we can't do it? So I think that we can show that when you do the organizing right and you make the alliances, the moods are flexible. You know, this is something that I think people should know. When I go to book events and I tell people, do you know that your neighborhood doesn't allow fourplexes? They look at me like, oh, what are you talking about? We have fourplexes in our neighborhood. I say, yeah, they're built in the 1930s. You know, you can't build one now? No, that makes no sense. Why is that the law? Most people don't even know about the restrictive laws they're under. And we need to get the word out. And the more we get the word out, the better we can do to change things. So I think that's happening. And we have YIMBY Durham, we have YIMBY Denver, we have YIMBY chapters opening up. But the more we have, the better, because it really changes the whole debate and dialogue. And I think we are making progress. I would say we've made remarkable progress. And we shouldn't just look at what we didn't accomplish, because, as I said, movements take a long time.
So I have another one from Val Parker. You seem to be focused on affordable rental units. Please address the value and benefit of affordable home ownership. How do we do that?
Well, you see, I think affordable home ownership, same thing. When you allow fourplexes to be built in every neighborhood, those are most likely going to be condos. So legalizing fourplexes, and Scott Wiener does have a bill to do so. I don't know if it's going to pass because of the dynamic we're in right now. But that's why we have to legalize it. What's going to be built is multi-unit buildings, and many of them will be condos. There's still, and the inclusionary rules apply, and so we still have a percentage of those units can be affordable. So when I was talking earlier about building in affluent neighborhoods, most likely those will be affordable home ownership. And so when people say they're for affordable home ownership, but they never let any of that be built in affluent neighborhoods, then maybe they're not really for affordable home ownership. That's what it really comes down to. So absolutely, I agree with that question.
So it seems like there's a big argument, or a good argument to be made for any new housing to be, and I'm talking about rental, to be mixed use or inclusionary, meaning we've got every single level in every single development. So which would prevent the racial and economic segregation. Now we're going to have that diversity, racial and economic diversity.
Yeah, one of the things I say in the book, because, there are YIMBYs I know, and some are on this call, I'm sure, who are against inclusionary housing, and I don't want to have that debate right now because I'm a big proponent of it. But I would say if you're talking about building a movement and you're saying we're against inclusionary housing, you're not going anywhere in any city I know. And I think that the states that have bans on inclusionary zoning, because many do, Colorado again and other states, what you need to do is do what I describe in the book in Seattle, where this HALA plan, and it's a great idea. They say to developers, okay, look, here's the zoning. We'll give you can build 2 more floors and have extra units, but you have to make a certain percentage affordable and rent control protected. And the developer can choose. And if they choose to do it, you circumvent the restrictions on tenant protections and inclusionary. And we did that. We did a home SF thing in San Francisco that didn't work out quite as well, but they're trying to do that in Austin. And that's really a great way for cities that can't get an inclusionary law passed to do it, is to do density bonuses. I mean, density bonuses, and this is sort of like the Scott Wiener plan where you can get 10 units and that's certain affordability, or SB 50 is really, which says be 50% affordable and we'll give you an easier way to pass. So it's where we have to go right now, given where we are. But I think we need to be more aggressive in pushing this because it also creates broader coalitions. The reason that Minneapolis has been successful, that Portland has been successful, and that Seattle's been successful is they form the kind of broad coalitions with environmentalists and progressives that hasn't happened like in Los Angeles for reasons we know.
Yeah, absolutely. So real quick, so let's move because we're running out of time. Really quickly, we might have room for a question or 2 more, but I want to get to a very important part of this presentation. So Randy, what are concrete actions that people can take and what should our targets be?
I think right now would be a time to look for at your city level about local ballot measures for November that raise revenue for housing. Because I think the timing is now. We'd have, councils have to put things on the ballot soon. And that's like something that's done immediately. And I think now is also a good time to begin the outreach process to the groups that I said we need to expand, the medical staff, the environmentalists, the seniors. I think that's really important to start building because we need those people involved. And I think they want to be involved because they see the overcrowding and they see what it means and they see the housing policy. One thing COVID-19 has conclusively shown is our housing policy in this country is broken. It is broken even worse than we thought. And it's not going to get better by continuing the failed policies that I attack in Generation Priced Out. And so, what I'd recommend people, pick up the book, pick up the paperback if you can, because my publisher would like the paperback to be sold. And it has that new preface where I do highlight a lot of the people, including California YIMBY, including Abundant Housing LA that pushed the RENA process. Because just think, if Abundant Housing LA doesn't push that RENA process, it doesn't happen, right? I mean, the difference, everyone who's on this Zoom call, you don't realize the difference you can make individually. It seems like it's a big, complex political world, but when people start hearing you say things that make sense, others follow. So this needs to be, these calls, we need to be working with each other and talking to each other more to give ourselves confidence and not feeling isolated like, well, I feel this way, but others don't. They do. But we have a silent majority in favor of our view. And when you push issues forward, you hear about people come out of the woodwork in support.
There are a lot of things that people can do, like join a commission, an advisory board,
Well,
run for office.
like you're doing, run for office, but also I want to really emphasize starting the YIMBY chapter because it has made such a difference. And I talk about it in the book. There's nothing, if you don't have a YIMBY chapter in your city, think about starting one with your friends tomorrow. And you can say, well, I only know 5 people. But once you put it on Twitter and once you put it on Facebook and say, hey, we're having a Zoom call, you want to be involved, it springs up. I mean, it springs up. None of these YIMBY chapters were here 10 years ago. They've all sprung up. Look what California YIMBY's become in just a short time. So trust me, I've talked to people around the whole country on this, and they start their chapter, and more Open New York is now a major important player in New York City. They weren't around before. These are all groups that started in the last 5 years, so you can do it. And if you need any questions on how to do it, email me, randy@thclinic.org, or go direct message me on Twitter or hit me on Facebook. Always happy to give advice to people working for more housing.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And California YIMBY is also here, and we can help. Another thing is positive pressure on electeds, tagging them when you're posting on Twitter or Facebook, tagging them with positive, we don't want to get aggressive or anything, but tagging so that they're actually being a part of the conversation.
And when they're
in
a situation like our own Lori Drosty here in Berkeley, Lori's in a district that has a lot of people who don't want any housing built, and she's been extremely courageous. And she needs to hear from people about how courageous she is, because at some point, elected officials, if they only hear the negative from the negative people, they think, wait, maybe my people aren't really for this, because they have constituencies they have to defer to. That's important.
Yeah. Okay, so we're running out of time. There were a few things that I wanted to get to, but one of them that's most important is all of the things that California YIMBY has going on, and we're going to drop into chat a link. We'll also be sending you follow-up emails with all of the resources. CAYIMBY.org, CaliforniaYIMBY.org. CaliforniaYIMBY.org/action-hub. And again, check chat. There's going to be a link dropped. We will email you the resources page. Let's see. What else did I really want to get in there? Oh, we've got the homework, which is a digest. That's CaliforniaYIMBY.org/homework. And all the information on all of these items are going to be in that resource document. So keep an eye out for that. Let's see. I don't want to miss anything important. Oh, the Schools and Communities First Initiative. So we have 1 minute to talk about the Schools and Communities First Initiative. And I'm going to actually share the screen for a second. Okay, so Schools and Communities First Initiative is going to be on the ballot in November 2020. And we would reclaim $12 billion for schools and community programs. For information, you can contact your regional organizing director. In the resources page that we've dropped the link into chat, and you'll get in a follow-up email. We've got the listing of all your regional organizing directors for California YIMBY, Northern California, Bay Area, LA, Orange County, and San Diego. So, oh, and Central California. Can't forget Central California. So you have a regional organizing director statewide. If there isn't a local team or a local organization, YIMBY team or YIMBY organization, like Randy said, you can form one. California YIMBY is here to support you in that. Let's see. I just want to make sure I hit everything. We've got 2 minutes. I especially just really want to thank Randy for being with us tonight, sharing his knowledge and his time. and for giving us hope. And we really want to thank you, the audience, for joining us during a time when the housing crisis is all the more exacerbated and exposed, and during which our advocacy efforts should be accelerated and expanded. With you by our side, we know it's possible to bring relief to millions of Californians. And in whatever form you choose to join a call to action, please know that we appreciate you and support you. We also have a survey that we're going to be dropping the link into chat. It will also be in a follow-up email. But we care about whether we're providing compelling and timely material. So we care about what you think. And let me make sure I'm not forgetting anything super important. Again, I just really want to thank Randy. And he knows, because he's done all the studies, he knows how much we can make change. And again, we just really appreciate you being with us tonight. And please stay safe out there.
Thank you very much for attending. Tonight's event has been recorded and will be available at caimb.org/events in the near future. We thank you for joining us and hope to see you again soon. Have a wonderful evening.
Hello?